Hello and welcome. My name is Emily Prieto, and I'm the co-host of the Seeds of Tao podcast alongside my husband, Joshua Prieto. We're also the co-owners of the Seeds of Tao education platform, an incubator for regenerative entrepreneurs. If you're new to the podcast, this is a podcast for impact entrepreneurs creating regenerative enterprises. We often get asked what exactly a regenerative enterprise or impact entrepreneur is. So if you're wondering, a regenerative enterprise builds triple bottom line profits through the practice of ethics and principles that lead to a more inclusive, fair, and balanced economy. Impact entrepreneurs, or regenpreneurs, as we sometimes like to call them, are those willing and able to take on the financial and personal risks of starting and building regenerative enterprises. You'll get to know exactly what all that means as you join us for this and future episodes, but know that we welcome everyone to join us as we work to build regenerative economies together. That's exactly why we are here doing what we do at Seeds of Tao. Our mission is to help establish regenerative economies in every bioregion by serving individual regenpreneurs like yourself. In this podcast, you'll hear the startup stories in all their glory from impact entrepreneurs all over the globe. You'll learn and grow the skills of building a regenerative enterprise from your peers, mentors, and leaders. Finally, we'll get to know each other as you engage in the podcast and join the wonderful Regenerative Business Economies Network, aka RegenBen, an open community where peers, colleagues, funders, allies, and supporters of regenpreneurs come together to build the regenerative economies of the future. Join us every month for a wonderful episode as we collectively move beyond sustainability and into our regenerative future. It all starts now.
All right, so let's get started. Welcome to the Seeds of Tao podcast. My name is Joshua Prieto, and I have a lovely guest today. I have Hannah Temple on the air with me, and we're going to be talking about her story, and she's going to tell us more about what she's working on, and we're going to get to know things. But as we do, it's good to have you, Hannah. How are you doing today?
Oh, well, lovely to be here, Josh. Yeah, I'm good. I'm sitting in my garden office at the bottom of my garden in a county called Kent, which is in the southeast of the United Kingdom. And I was just telling you how extremely wet it's been over the last few weeks. So I'm kind of looking out at a pretty grey, wet day. But yeah, it's my feelings about the weather are extremely complicated these days. So I'm holding kind of my slight remorse that it's not a sunnier, brighter day, alongside real gratitude that it is not. We're not in a drought condition here. We're not in heat wave, wildfire condition here. So yeah, I'm holding a kind of mixture of feelings of gratitude and kind of sogginess.
Well, that's great, and I love the ability to have an office in a garden. That's also really fun, right? So we have we're on completely different sides of the world, but so it's your later day. But I really do like this to start off our questioning of like what got you up this morning, and it just starts getting a little bit of the day in the life of you, Hannah. So tell us what got you up this morning, and tell us about your day.
Thanks. Well, what a lovely question. And I suppose, well, lots of things got me up this morning and get me up in the morning. And I think I could probably summarize it a little bit by saying that I get up for possibility. There's a lot of kind of distressing news in the world. There's a lot of evidence that we are not living and working in harmony with the systems around us. There's a lot of stuff that can feel hard to wake up to and look at in the morning. But I think it's really important that we do look kind of cold, straight up, look really kind of plainly at the world around us and not try and pretend it's something else. But I also think that alongside all of that evidence that things are troubling, that things are troubled, that things are not in a good way, there is also so much beauty, so much possibility. And, you know, whether it is the honey smell of buddleia as I go on my morning run this morning, whether it is the baby crow hiding in the grass, whether it is the man speaking gently and kindly and wisely to his children on the train that I was on yesterday in 3 different languages. Whatever it is, there is so much evidence of compassion, creativity, beauty, kindness all around us. And I find that infinitely inspiring. And so every morning, I think I feel kind of compelled by both of those two apparently intention forces. The fact that things are not as I would wish them to be in the world, that things are not in harmony, in balance, that we are not living in the ways that I would love us to be. I think we can be much wiser than we are being now. I'm driven by an impulsion to get up and to do good work to try and shift that. But I'm also really driven by joy and knowing that there is so much beauty and possibility in every single day, in every single hour, minute, moment of the days that we have on this amazing planet. So it's a joy to get out of bed, really.
That's wonderful. I love the complex side, or the on one side we have this very difficult thing that we're grappling with in the many things that we're grappling with in the world, and on the other side we're also seeing these amazing moments of joy, love, and beauty around us. And how do we grapple with those? Well, you wake up in the morning and you do, right? You figure it out, but it can be the reason why we get up in the morning is because of there's so much joy and love, and there's so much fear and doubt, and we get up because there's all of it, right? And to really be a human being, that's what it is, right? To get up and to deal with those. So thank you for sharing and giving us a little bit of the perspective of what your thought is as you wake up and do the work that you do. Let's dive more into that work, and let's get to know you before we know that piece or pieces of your work before we figure out how you got to this point, right? And share your story. So tell us what you're working on and give us a little bit of the context of who you're working with and the type of work that includes. Sure.
Well, I think like most of us, I'm doing a few different kinds of work in the world. And the first area of that, which is perhaps the area we'll talk most about today, is, my work as the founder of a collective consultancy called Tealco, which stands for the Teal Collective, and its work to really support organizations to become truly regenerative forces in the world. That's one aspect of my work. But there are multiple aspects to my work in the world. And I would say another aspect is the podcast that I host, which is it's a kind of a special experience to be on the other side of the questions today. Enjoying definitely. That. Called A Thriving Future, which is very much linked to the work that Tealco does. Thirdly, there's some work that I'm doing I'm the parliamentary candidate for the Green Party in my area of the UK, which means that in the next general election, I will be the candidate. So we're working very hard to run a really strong and robust campaign in the area where I live. That's an element of the work that I'm doing in the world. And of course, a crucial part of my work is about the work that I'm doing to be a good wife, a good daughter, a good sister, a good auntie, and crucially at the minute, a good daughter-in-law, because my mother-in-law is not very well at the minute. So there's a good amount of work that I'm doing to make sure that I am being a regenerative person in all sorts of aspects of my work. And that also involves the work that you do on yourself, right? And I think we'll probably go into in the course of this discussion how much of the work that any of us do out in the world is only a reflection of the work that we're doing inside. That inner work is completely it completely shapes what we're able to put out. So that's another big aspect of kind of the work that I'm doing is asking myself the questions about how I'm growing, how I'm developing, how I'm equipping myself in order to be able to do these other things well, to really be part of something that is different and not just a recreation of the same things that we're trying to move away from.
Wow. Yeah. I think, well, definitely that's a big part of our journey as entrepreneurs, right? Is that being able to work on ourselves to be able to tackle these big things that are out in the world that are externally, really a lot of times we have no control of, right? But we're trying to be aware and impactful and create these enterprises that are creating change. But again, we can only influence that. We can only be a piece of that. The only thing that we have complete control over is ourselves, and so that's the huge part of the journey that we're taking on. So I thank you for that perspective as well. As we're now at this point, we got a little bit of an understanding of who you are, what you're working on, and it's a lot of work that we're hearing from you. Tell us, how did you get involved in building Tealco, being in the Green Party and the work that you're doing there? Take us back to wherever you want to consider the starting point of this, and share the journey that you've taken.
Let's take a moment for a promo break and tell you about a free resource that Seeds of Tao has to help your regenerative brand break out of the noise. I feel regenerative enterprises and the brands they create for themselves are really setting the bar for what responsible business should look like today and in the future. But I have not always felt this way. In the past, I thought that regenerative brands all looked alike and had no lasting power to stand out in the markets they serve. Don't get me wrong, I've always hoped that the regenerative movement would turn into a bustling industry over the time. But when I first got involved in permaculture, regeneration, and circular economics, regenerative enterprises had a long way to go. But what changed? Well, what changed is that the regenerative brands are getting smarter about how they identify themselves in the market. We can't all look like hippies on our way to Burning Man, but we also want to create authentic brands that can stand out against the extractive behemoths in the market. I am not suggesting you change the look of your brand into something that is not you. What I am suggesting is that you build an intentional brand identity that your ideal client can resonate with while also setting you apart in the market. If you follow the promo link in the description or in the show notes, you will find a free resource to help you define your brand's unique archetype. It's called the Regenerative Brand Archetype Quiz, and it's a free resource to help you build a brand that breaks out of the noise and into the hearts of your ideal clients. There's really nothing to lose and absolutely everything to gain. With that, let's get back to the episode.
Well, I think, as with all stories, it's good to start at the beginning, right?
Yes.
So I would say I would start this story from around the ages of 3 or 4. That's when I first remember having this sort of very physical feeling, a physical sense in my body that things in the world around me were not right. As I say, I could kind of sense this feeling that we were not living in harmony, whether it was witnessing people being treating each other badly, treating themselves badly, treating animals badly, treating ecosystems badly, witnessing that as a very, very young person, and finding that A, painful, and B, extremely confusing, because it seemed to me, very, very odd that we would make those choices. And it seemed, again, obviously from a place of deep naivety, not knowing anything at all at that point about how the world kind of functions and the structures that we created ourselves. But it seemed like such an odd set of choices. It seemed like, well, there must be such different ways to choose to live than this, and just feeling quite baffled. And it even materialized into like a kind of recurring dream that I would get just before I went to sleep each night in this period of my life, where I could kind of picture almost like, you remember on televisions we used to be able to see white noise, if things like went off air, it was like this picture of static, and it was almost like that, this kind of like unpleasant noise, and like a visual that didn't make any sense. And I think that feeling, that physical sensation that things are out of balance, and feeling it in me, not just like in my mind as a theoretical concept that things could be better, but really physically feeling uncomfortable with the state of the world, has stayed with me my whole life and has shaped very much my path from then onwards. Because I think from then on, I was on a kind of quest, I suppose, or on a journey to try and understand, well, why is it that the world is not this kind of harmonious, balanced place that in my sweet young naivety I imagine is entirely possible? And I have to be kind of upfront here and say that I don't think that's naivety, actually. Now that I'm older and have many more wrinkles than I did when I was 3 years old, I really do believe that still that is entirely possible. I really believe that there is that it is entirely within our capabilities to live in entirely different ways, and that we're an incredibly creative species, and so we can create whatever world we would like to be living in terms of our human world. And so that kind of belief that there is a way for us to live in harmony with the world really kind of drove my story. So that materialized in a few different things. So part of it was what I chose to study. So I studied geography primarily because it allowed me to study everything. So I could study science, I could study politics, I could study economics, I could study how soil works, and it allowed me to study a huge range of different things at once. So it meant that I didn't have to choose, which was nice for a bit. And then I studied political economy. And I think that kind of academic point has shaped my story quite a bit, because particularly in terms of, well, I think political economy kind of sharpened these skills, but it really, it's a world of exploring the connections between dots. It's a world of understanding that things are not just what they seem, of recognizing that actually everything is interconnected, that politics is not just politics. Politics is shaped by the economy, and the economy is not just the economy. It's shaped by politics, and obviously many, many, many more interconnections and interdependencies beyond that. And that kind of echoed a little bit with what I experienced in studying geography, of kind of seeing the connections between political systems and soil systems, and being able to see the connections between the weather and politics, in terms of them both being complex, dynamic systems. So I think that study kind of brought in a real lens of systems thinking, of systems practice, and interconnectedness, which again has very much shaped my life since. After study, I think one of the big things that that really kind of hit me as I was studying political economy in particular was the huge power that organizations have in our world, in our society. So whether you're talking about governments or corporations or religious institutions or civil society, however you think of it, groups of humans who've come together to achieve particular goals and aims, they overwhelmingly have shaped the structure, the form, the aims of our society. So I left that experience thinking, well, if you could just shift how organizations worked a little bit, then the potential ripple effects are huge for that. So I kind of went scratching around to see what kind of work there was to do that related to that. And I was really lucky to uncover one of the first specialist consultancies that worked on business and human rights. So it helped organizations, businesses in that case particularly, to really understand the impacts of their decisions, their ways of working on people around the world, and help them to make different choices, different ways of acting to have better impacts on the people around the world. And that was, and I then spent kind of a big chunk of my career with that organization and a number of others working in, I would say, the space of sustainability and human rights, and helping organizations to become more aware of their impacts in the world and to make better, more responsible choices at a very practical level. So I spent a lot of time in supply chains around the world, in factories and farms, in offices. I spent a lot of time with kind of executive teams in big organizations, helping them to grapple with some of this and realize kind of the impacts of some of the decisions that they were often making at kind of a head office level. So I spent quite a lot of time engaging with not only kind of interconnectedness, like the connection between what a procurement team's decision makes in Germany or in Utah or in Shanghai, the decision that they make, the impacts that have on people in wherever, all over the world. So I help them grapple with interconnectedness, but I also help them grapple with like the practical stuff to go, okay, there's an issue here. How can we actually practically and powerfully do something about that? So what does it mean for how we train people in this job? What does it mean for the incentive structures that we put around them? What does it mean for our policies and processes? What does it mean for our leadership to actually shift this? And that has contributed to where I am now, because what I over time noticed was that the world of sustainability and human rights is vital. It is plays a vital role, I think. But I think that its role is primarily about hospicing. It's about helping the existing system to die back with some grace, to not just go out kicking and screaming and dragging the whole system down on its way. I think a lot of the organizations that I work with then either need to disappear or need to fundamentally change what they're doing if they're going to be part of a future that's worth inheriting. Mm-hmm. So I think the work that often people in sustainability and human rights and the work that I was doing, the work that it's doing, whether or not it's kind of calling itself this, is actually about hospicing that existing system. And what I noticed was that I had a really growing energy to be part of the birth of a new system. So not just be hospicing the old system, though that is vital and important work. But I noticed that within me, there was a really growing energy to say, yeah, but what about what comes next? And how are we supporting organizations to step into a different story? And so, yeah, I noticed that there were a handful of organizations, more than a handful now, I'm happy to say, but there was a community of organizations who were saying, yes, we know we need to do things differently. We know we need to be part of something different. But after we've written a wonderful vision statement, what on earth do we do next? How do we make this practical? What does it mean for how we recruit? What does it mean for how we design our products? What does it mean for our waste systems? Blah, blah, blah. It seemed to me a bit of a gap of kind of a bridge. There was a lack of a bridge between the idea of a new story and the practical day-to-day operations of people running organizations. And so I felt like, given the experience that I had of working with so many organizations at that very nitty-gritty practical level, I decided to build Tealco to kind of step into that gap, to create that bridge, to offer ideas, frames, to give people who are seeking a different story a means of grabbing hold of it, a means of walking towards it. So I have brought together, because another thing that frustrated me a little bit about kind of sustainability and human rights was there was a lack of space, it seemed, to really bring in some of the wisdom that I see in schools of thought around, for example, permaculture, biomimicry, regenerative leadership. It wasn't, a lot of the frames around it were quite bounded, quite mechanistic. There are these tick boxes, there are these processes, there are these ways in which we become more sustainable. Mm-hmm. And I felt that that would get us so far, but it probably wouldn't crack us into a completely different way of operating, which I felt was what was needed. And so when I started Tealco, it was with an ambition of really integrating, creating a space where lots of these different schools of thought could come together in one place. Because I think what we need is something fundamentally different. It is a kind of a holistic shift into a different way of being. And so I wanted to create an opportunity where, those different schools of thought around, ecological economics and just transition and donut economics and permaculture could all kind of mix together in the same pot. So I created this organization with that intent. And I can say a little bit more about the work that we do and why it's called what it's called in a minute, perhaps. But yeah, that's sort of been the journey to here in terms of Tealco.
I think it's a beautiful story to share, and it gives us a really good perspective of especially early stages. There's a couple of things that I want to bring up about it and maybe dive a little bit deeper into it. You went all the way from your early childhood, right? And I look at my children and I see some of those moments that just like light up memories in my own mind of like what it was to kind of go through different things in my life, to see for the first time, a fight or a disagreement and just be baffled by it. Like, is that really something that needs to happen? Or this seems very wrong, right? And we don't have to have very complex thought around that. It's the feeling, it's the, we instinctively know at a very young age, right? And a lot of times without all of the different things making it so complicated as an adult, you could really truly understand, what it is to be in harmony with things around us, right? And so I really like that you started your story off there. And I kind of want to dive into it just a little bit of what your childhood was like, and to help you to understand this not, things around you not being in harmony, like as far as the ecological sides of things, and maybe understanding the human rights sides of things, because those were really prominent in the work that you started early on as well. Tell us more, that period. And then I would like to, because you were talking about getting into consulting, I also noticed, I was watching an early interview of Phil Knight, who I really enjoyed his story. If you ever the book Shoe Dogs, if you read the book Shoe Dogs,
I haven't. No,
it's really interesting, right? And of how he went through his entrepreneurial journey, it's very inspiring in a lot of ways. And then you look at a lot of the things that because he was one of the first big businesses to do the China thing, to do, he started off in Japan, and then to do the outsourcing the labor from a country and then bringing it in, but not being able to see and associate and attach what he was doing in other countries as much as if, because he wasn't necessarily as tied to it as, someone that's in making the shoes in that other country is, or, and so he got a lot of pushback, and obviously a lot of companies have, Nike being one of those companies, of many companies that we feel like maybe need to, are built on a system that needs to transition away. Right. So I kind of want to talk about those 2 points, like early on, how you saw the disharmony, particularly in your youth. And then after we kind of tackle that, how that kind of turned into in your work, seeing that disharmony, or just disattachment from owners of businesses or organizations, and all the pieces of the organizations and their supply chains, and the way that they're impacting, how that also unfolded for you. So let's start from the beginning again a little bit, and just dive a little bit more into that disharmony that you perceived, and how it kind of came up for you in your childhood.
Well, I think that the two things, the things that you've brought together, I think feel absolutely right to be together, because I think they are the same topic. So I think in terms of my childhood, I don't think I had a kind of a remarkable kind of any particular thing that happened in my childhood that made it kind of more conducive to this feeling kind of being felt. I think, as you said, I think this is actually kind of a universal thing that all children are able to perceive and witness. If you show children, there are so many videos now of children when they first realize that when they've eaten chicken or ham or whatever, and they go, oh, it's that animal here that I've maybe been petting at this, farm or whatever. That animal is the one that I was eating. And there are so many videos now of them kind of having that realization and the trauma that the kind of the upset that they feel when they go, oh my goodness, like that creature died for me to eat it. And there are so many examples of when of us all. I'm sure we can all remember, like you say, like when children witness a fight, or when you see a war on the television, or you see people throw a can out of their car window or whatever. You witness these small things that to you as you're thinking, I can see all this litter on the side of the road. Why do we throw that out? And anytime any of us spend time with any young children, you get those questions, right? Like, why did that person say that to them? Why did they do that? And I think as children, we all know, we all recognize, because we have a sense of connectedness. And I think what allows someone like Phil Knight or any of us to make choices that end up having negative repercussions is because we have lost our sense of connectedness to everything else. We've lost our sense of recognition that actually there is no separate me. My health is entirely dependent on the health of the environment that I'm in. It's entirely dependent on the health of the other organisms that I share this planet with. That if everything else is unhealthy, I'm unhealthy, because we're all interconnected. And there are so many different kind of theories of, tracing that back to whether it was kind of the Enlightenment and Descartes' separation of mind and body, whether it's, I'm reading a fascinating book at the moment called, I'm going to forget the name now, Jeremy Lent, and it's The Patterning Instinct. I was getting it mixed up with the second book, but, he's tracing it back to a particular culture and their kind of very patriarchal and kind of war-making ways of working in the world, and how actually they ended up spreading across kind of the world in our early ancient origins, and how that's kind of ended up shaping quite a bit of our early value system and the value system that maybe persists today. There are so many different theories as to kind of how we've become so disconnected, but I think I think when we're born and as young children, we sense that connectedness. We recognize that it doesn't feel right for people to hurt one another or for us to hurt the world around us. We recognize that it feels kind of dumb and odd and futile. And it's something that we only come to end up replicating ourselves because we're taught with all of the system that surrounds us, rewards certain behaviors and not others. It incentivizes certain behaviors and not others. It encourages certain behaviors and not others. And it's only through that kind of unlearning process and relearning process that we end up ourselves as adults kind of recreating the same things that upset us as children. So, I don't think that, I think it's very rare that people set out intentionally, on the broad spectrum of all of the actions being taken by all the people all over the world. Overwhelmingly, I think most of us are just trying to do our best. We're trying to look after our children, our families, our communities. We're trying to do the best we can with the resources available to us. I think it's the rarities that are actually kind of intending to cause any harm. But I think the issue is that because we've become so disconnected from our interdependence with the world around us, that it becomes harder and harder to make wise choices. It becomes easier and easier to make choices that end up causing harm to others, to our wider world around us. And so I think, when it comes to to Nike and sweatshops in China, or when it comes to, the host of millions of other examples that we could give, and certainly ones that I've been implicated in. Any of us, every time we buy clothing or food, every time we take various actions, of course there will be consequences to those things. But it's that the loss of sense of connectedness, of interdependence, that I think allows that to happen at such a scale that it does now.
Yeah. And I can definitely see the challenge that it comes with this. You mentioned more the kind of hospice service that we've kind of created to be less bad in a lot of ways, right? In the work that we're doing, we truly have a lot of people that truly have the desires to make change happen and move towards a better way, but you only know what you know at that point, right? And so being able to make that transition is critical. So with Tealco, maybe we can start that part of the journey that you're currently in right now. Moving that transition, having that transition away from these extractive businesses that are maybe trying to be less bad, but at the same time, I think are in a lot of ways just unaware, right? Of what they're doing, right? What is it for Tealco to step into that space, or how have you begun to step into that space and navigate it in a way that brings about some type of level of change for an individual and an organization, and varying degrees of from the individual outward, right? Or how does that change come about through Tealco?
So, Tealco's mission is to support organizations to become regenerative forces in the world. We have a stance that we work with organizations that are committed to becoming more regenerative. So if there is an organization out there who is, arriving to say, well, we just want to minimize the harm that we do, and, and we'd like to tick a few boxes and show good, then we're not the right partner for them. So we're intentionally seeking to work with organizations who are ready to think more holistically, to embrace some quite tough conversations, and to kind of step into a genuinely different story, not a different color of the same. So in a way, in response to your question, partly we're not doing the work of the reconvincing, of convincing people that this is the right path. We're working with the people who are already, or that's our intention certainly, is to always work with the people who are ready to kind of step in. And then in terms of what that actually looks like, we talk about our work in terms of, I suppose I use kind of three different categories. So first category is assessing the landscape. So giving the organization a bit of a picture of where they are now. And that there's broadly kind of two different ways in which we'll support organizations to do that. One is through kind of systems mapping, helping an organization to become more kind of cognizant of their interdependence, of their interconnection. So, you mentioned earlier, sometimes people will cause harm because they're just not aware of the implications of some of the things that they might choose and what that means for communities, many, many miles away or whatever. And so it's kind of trying to reduce that invisibility, help make the connectedness much more visible. And the second thing that we might do in that category of assessing the landscape is run what I call a regeneration landscape assessment. So I mentioned earlier about how important it was to me to kind of be a space of integration, of bringing together many, many schools of thought that up until, I was kind of seeing each had such richness, and it was frustrating that they were not together, not kind of alongside one another. And this regeneration landscape assessment is a methodology that I developed, which does bring all of those things together into essentially a set of questions to ask organizations to consider all of the different aspects of their practice, from their origin story to their leadership culture to their who they have, what the nature of their contracts, to their what their products are doing, what their taxes are doing, how their money's flowing, etc., etc. It kind of takes a holistic view of the organization and gives them a picture of it. So that's kind of the assessing the landscape element to the kind of work we would do. Mm-hmm. Second category of work is what I call preparing the soil. It's kind of enabling an organization to build that richness of connection, that shared sense of purpose and story, so that they're ready to take action together. Because we all know, if you dive into something substantive, then, if you haven't kind of engaged people with it, if you're talking a language that doesn't resonate with people, if you're kind of off doing something in one corner and not engaging other parts, then it's probably only going to get so far. So the work of preparing the soil is really about helping people come together, to have dialogue, to hear one another, to explore different challenges and questions together, reach a shared level of understanding and purpose, so that then they are able to enter the third category of work, which is planting the seeds, which is where we help organizations to identify the fertile soil that's ready for them to explore experimentations of different regenerative practice, to say, okay, well, here's where we can start doing maybe something different. And I can maybe give some examples of the work in those different categories if that's helpful. But that's kind of the work that we do, is we help organizations, overall. I haven't spoken about kind of why Tealco, but that links back to some work done by someone called Frederick Laloux, who wrote an amazing book called Reinventing Organizations. And in that, he used a lot of work that was done on evolutionary and developmental psychology, which looked at the different phases of psychological evolution in humans, and kind of applied it to organizations and said, well, what are sort of the evolutionary phases of organizations as they get more mature, as they get more wise? And he gave each of these a color. And for example, red is kind of the most basic level. And it's kind of like, the examples would be like street gangs. Like, okay, it's about, like brute force. The one who's most physically powerful is the one who's in control. Like that's kind of the operating model of the red color. And you move up and up. And I would suppose amber is kind of the most common form of organization in today's world. And the metaphor associated with that is organization as machine, an organization that is often really productive, extremely outward facing. Often the kind of internal environment is one of kind of functionality. People are often treated a little bit like robots. There's not a huge amount of space for you to be kind of a really complex, nuanced human being. You're sort of expected to arrive, do your work, that's your main purpose, get that done. And there's kind of a lot of rigidity in these organizations, often rigid hierarchies, for example. Next layer, you kind of the color is green, and the metaphor is organization as family. And here we start to see much more like, okay, there's a purpose for this organization beyond making profit. We recognize that, okay, we are here to make profit. That's our primary purpose, but we also want to do X as well. We also want to, improve children's livelihoods, or we want to plant a whole lot of trees or something. There's like an extra recognition of a broader purpose. And people within the organization are allowed to become kind of more human. They're allowed to express more of their selves. Ben and Jerry's is an example that's often used as like, okay, this is kind of a green organization. And then the kind of outer ring is teal. And the metaphor there is organization as ecosystem. And this is where you see organizations that are more dynamic, more fluid, where it's absolutely recognized that the main purpose of the organization is to support the greater thriving of life on this planet, and that making profit is kind of something that needs to sit alongside that in order to provide the nutrients for that work, but that's not the main objective of the organization itself. And there's lots more kind of fluidity and dynamism in terms of how decisions are made, or how power is held within an organization. And that's kind of, I suppose, when we talk about like, what does Tealco do, or how does Tealco kind of support this kind of shift, is very much, I say, we're helping organizations to become more like ecosystems and less like machines. we're helping organizations to experiment with what it would look like for them to take wisdom from how the natural world operates, because nature is the ultimate teacher of what it means to regenerate, to create conditions for the greater thriving of life. And so what would it look like for an organization to learn from how nature operates, to find ways to reflect that in how it operates in all of its different ways and shapes? That's what we're there to do, is to help organizations to navigate that, to explore that, and to experiment with putting that into practice.
I love the namesake and the why behind what you're working towards is really getting us to think of organizations as ecosystems that are impacting their environment and surroundings, right? And it's a great metaphor, great vision and mission for a business to kind of strive towards. I'm also really curious to understand, and I love the way that you've put into play those kind of three dynamics of the levels of work that you're doing with the organization to get them to that point, right? Because it opens us up for a deeper understanding of the inherent systems that are already existing within these organizations, right? They're already existing in nature, and but we're creating misconceptions of what through our actions, because we're not fully understanding those inherent systems. We're only applying certain parts of it, or we're missing the whole picture. We create the imbalance that we kind of talked about, right? Prior. And so I love that perspective. And so like that, to me, you're working with these organizations that are ready, you mentioned, right? You're not working with organizations that are, let's try to be more sustainable, or we need to improve our image out in the world. And so therefore we'll create this campaign that does a couple cool things, but then lacks really substance in the background. Which to me is greenwashing, and a lot of where greenwashing comes from. I think there's good intention somewhere where they want to do a few good things, but they don't really are ready. They're not ready, like you said, to make the change, right? And so you're working with those that are ready, and I think there's organizations that, like you said, need to be the hospice to kind of help people transition, and there's people that need to make that transition happen, and then there's different organizations even at that level trying to make things happen. Like we need to catch people before they fall, right? Into this pit. Like, so the education systems that are helping us to move these entrepreneurs but we also have a lot of people in the workforce right now, a lot of organizations that want to do change. They're just trying to figure out how they can do that. And this is where Tealco is really able to shine and step into places. For the last part of this conversation, I want to, I would love for you to share through your experiences and the journey that you've taken to make Tealco happen. And we'd even get to some of the political work that you're doing as well, right? And but maybe that's another time that we could share more about that. What would you hope these entrepreneurs that are working towards some of these organizational changes themselves, what would you hope they would take away from the journey of Tealco and from the work that you're doing?
Oh, hard to think of something. Just one.
Right.
I'll give a few things that I think I would love people to take away and to see how they can incorporate into what they're doing. I do think integration, which I've mentioned a few times, feels really key to me. There's something kind of silly about us kind of recognizing that actually behind a lot of the the issues that we see now is a kind of lack of awareness of interdependence. And yet there's still often so much specialization in terms of what people do. They kind of go, okay, we're a design firm and we sit over here. And so we aren't going to talk to the people who know about sustainability, or we aren't going to talk to the people who know about marketing, or we aren't going to talk to the people who know about this science stuff, because we're a design agency. And so we speak to designers. Or whatever your line of work is, I would say biodiversity leads to greater resilience and richness. And the same is true in your own organizations. You need to bring in genuine diversity of thought. You need to integrate different ideas, different concepts, different work, and provide a space where those things can actually have an opportunity to cross-pollinate one another, have an opportunity to meet and touch and explore what they can learn from each other. So I think integration is a massive part of heading somewhere different to where we've come from. A second thing I would say is vulnerability. And I'm a big subscriber to the Brené Brown definition of this, of being like, vulnerability is bravery. Like, that's what courage is vulnerability. So I would say that any entrepreneur kind of heading into this space, anyone already working here, like, do what you need to do to allow yourself to ask questions, to admit that you don't know the answer, to invite challenge. These are the things that help us grow. These are the things that help this become an initiative that moves away from some of that stuff we talked about earlier, like, oh, my prestige, my status. That's the stuff that ends up unwittingly getting us into a position where we're causing harm when that wasn't our intent. We need to do that inner work that we talked about. And I think recognizing that for all of us, vulnerability is hard. Standing up in front of people who are expecting you to know the answer and saying, I don't know the answer, is hard. Having someone give you feedback that says you can do better is hard. But that is the way in which we step into something different. And the third thing that I'm going to add for now is like, allow nature to be your teacher. Spend time outside. Spend time observing, noticing. You don't need to be an ecologist. You don't need to be a biologist. You don't need to have any expertise. All of us can go outside and look and observe and learn. Nature knows how to work regeneratively. It knows how to regenerate places, spaces, organisms. It knows how to create conditions for the greater thriving of life. Our job is to watch, is to listen and to learn. So whatever you're doing, if you're seeking to be part of a new story of regeneration, then you can't. Why would you miss out on all of the amazing lessons, all of the answers that are all around us all the time? So definitely that's something that I would really, really encourage everyone wanting to head down this path to do.
That's beautiful. Yeah, thank you. I think integration, you bringing that up first, is a huge one for the regenerative businesses out there, or those that are seeking to be regenerative. Again, I have a hard time thinking that any one of us right now are regenerative, right?
Yeah.
But we are moving towards, and we're working towards, right? And the integration is so key in that aspect. And then your last one with nature, right? Us being able to learn how to integrate is largely done by observing nature, right? And being out in nature and seeing those patterns of how we are completely integrated into this world ecosystem, right? And those are really some great lessons. I think the entrepreneurs that are listening here they're either working towards or they're starting to gain an understanding of that and applying it into their business. And the more and more that we see that, I think we can see regenerative businesses thrive, right? And come into life. And I'm not one for all the certifications and whatnot when it comes to regeneration or whatever. I think it's really, really hard for us to put a label on it at that point and say it's this. But I think there are opportunities for us to recognize the steps that we're taking and the growth that we're having towards that. And I think those are two really big pieces. Is like, are we able to integrate? And is it something that can be observed in nature, natural patterns, right? That's can be perpetuated and keep on going despite the pieces that are not fulfilling or not working for us, right? So I thank you for sharing your story and the lessons that you've taken from it, and giving us some perspective in how Tealco is moving us towards those regenerative enterprises. As we kind of wrap up, how can we reach out? How can we? I know you have the podcast. Share with us the different ways that we can get engaged with the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. I think best ways to connect. The podcast I hope will be really relevant to anyone who's listening to this. So it's called A Thriving Future, and you can find it on Tealco's website, www.tealco.org, or you can find it on any normal podcast platform. And otherwise, I would say, be in touch with me. It's great I'm always keen to have kind of connections with more people working in this space. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Hannah Temple, and you should be able to find me with Tealco and through our website. So that would be kind of my suggestion for how you can best get in touch.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll have those links on the podcast show notes. So those that are listening, please head over to the Seeds of Tao website. So you can click on our media and podcasts there, get into this episode and look at all the wonderful resources there. We'll have links in the descriptions as well for those that are listening on Spotify and other places, right? So thanks again, Hannah, and thanks again for everybody that's listening today. Bye for now.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. It really is a blessing and a pleasure to bring each episode to you. So what'd you think? If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review or follow us on the podcast platform of your choice. Each review really does help us to further the reach of this podcast and move our mission forward to build regenerative economies in every bioregion. If you have a suggestion or feedback for us, please let us know in the open and free Regenerative Business Economies Network, known as RegenBen, which is linked in the description and in the show notes of this episode. RegenBen also has an awesome community request form that allows you to suggest guests, register to be a guest on the podcast, and share your own regenerative entrepreneur startup story, or any other suggestion you may have for the community. Without your feedback and requests, this podcasting community wouldn't be what it is, so please let us know. Now, this may be bye for now, but remember, it doesn't end here. It has only just begun. The regenerative economies of the future start now with you.